and loving God, we come now before you with our hearts prepared to hear your word. Speak and transform our lives. Lead us into your salvation, into your extraordinary. Lead us outside of our lives and daily routines and into your miracles, into fiery pillars and parting seas, into a future and a life bought and paid for by your very death and resurrection. Gracious Lord, speak your word unto us this morning in spite of me or through me. For this we pray. Amen. The Israelites had just finished conquering the Promised Land. They had been in the wilderness for 40 years. They had been in bondage for over 400 years. They had been at war for multiple years, conducting a campaign to free up cities and to find their space. And all this time, God had been with them and performed miracles among them. He parted the Red Sea. He gave them manna and quail in the wilderness to eat. He provided water for them from the very rock. He parted the Jordan River. He struck down the walls of Jericho at the sound of a trumpet blast. Everything had been done by the power of God, and now it was time to settle down. It was time to begin to build lives, to work, to go to school, to learn, to worship. It was time for the wilderness and the traveling and the journey to end, for a normal daily routine to begin. It's easy to understand why Joshua might have been a little bit worried about the people. It's easy to follow the gods of your neighbors and the gods of your ancestors, to follow back into old habits and old routines. And this is a people, after all, that could not imagine anything being done without a direct intervention, that there were no such concepts of machines in their minds. If the sun rose, it was because somebody physically caused it to rise and travel the sky. If it rained, it was because somebody was physically causing that water to pour from the heavens. It only made sense that it would be easier for them to explain this to be done by multiple gods, as their neighbors did, as their captors did, as their ancestors did, than to believe that one almighty, powerful God had built a system that ran and functioned all on its own. And that almighty and powerful God was there and present with them and able to be with them. And yet this is the God whom they had experienced throughout the wilderness and throughout their conquest of the Promised Land. And Joshua had known this people. He had known that they are a people that quickly forgot, that they are a people who would experience God's mercies and experience God's miracles, and yet, not too much longer after that, turn back to their grumbling and their old habits and ways. And so he gets up there and he makes a speech to all the leaders of Israel as they are preparing to settle down, and tells them, serve the Lord your God in truth and sincerity. Fear him. Or if you will not choose this day whom you will serve, will you serve the gods of your ancestors from across the river? Or will you turn and serve the gods of your neighbors, the Amorites, in whose land you now inhabit? As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord and remember what he has done. And the people, remembering all that God has done, remembering that God has just delivered them this land flowing with milk and honey, shout and claim, we will serve the Lord your God. The Lord our God. But Joshua is not convinced. Because as I said, he knows those people. He knows that they are prone to forgetting, that they are prone to falling back into the everyday and into the old habits. And so he says, it will not be easy. You will not be able to do it. And if you try and you fail, our God is a holy and jealous God, and He will punish you for failing. He is a God that does not allow for split loyalties, but demands wholehearted worship, wholehearted faith. The people say, no, we will succeed. We will worship and serve the Lord our God. For He has done these great things. He has delivered us from bondage in Egypt. He has brought us through the wilderness and cared for us, and He has delivered us into this land and gave over into our hands our enemies. We will worship the Lord our God. So Joshua says, then we'll make a covenant. And they do. And the people of that generation and the people of the following generation worship the Lord their God. They remember all that He had done. But the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament as we call it, is a testament of how the people of Israel continue to go through this cycle that God does these great and wonderful miracles, and they remember them and they worship God with their whole hearts, and then 2 generations later, the people have forgotten God. The memories of His wondrous deeds are fading into the ordinary, the everyday, and the people around them and their influence begin to take hold. Thousands and thousands of years into the future, where we now sit, we may not face the struggles of worrying about worshiping false gods per se. But we are people that are familiar with experiencing spiritual highs and moments where we just are so close and connected to God. And yet, they fade. And we forget those moments, and we forget the fire and the passion that burned in our bones in those moments. And we allow the ordinary and the everyday routines to wear us down and to separate us from God. The power of this world is not a power that can match God in a face-to-face confrontation. By any means, God will win in any situation. But the power of this world is to convince us that what we have here and now, what is ordinary, what the world has to offer, is good enough. Which keeps us from striving for the greatness, for the extraordinary that God would have in our lives. The daily routines in which we are content prevent us from seeking out the wonders of what could be and the excellence that God has prepared for us. Like the Israelites, we are prone to forget. We are prone to experience God in our moments of baptism, perhaps in communion. Perhaps we even experience God in a spiritual retreat or a class or an exceptional sermon. And we leave church on fire, ready to go change our lives and take on the world. And Monday rolls around and that fire, it gets a little faded because we have all these things we have to do. And then Tuesday, it dies down a little bit more. By next weekend, we're lucky if we even remember what that sermon was that caused us to leave church so passionate, so ready to go out and take on the world, or we forget that retreat. The world brings us back into the ordinary and out of the extraordinary. Right now, around the world, there are billions of people worshiping gods or meditating in a place of worship They do it each and every week. It is an ordinary and common act. Coming to church is an act of the ordinary. And yet, we are a people of the extraordinary God, a God that calls us to more than just coming and sitting here and listening to His Word and singing songs on Sunday, but a God that calls us to come and experience Him and to be a part of His miracles, to see Him face to face in the lives of the people in our community, in the lives of our brothers and sisters in Christ, and even in our own lives. When we look down and we notice for the first time that our hands are doing just what we think Christ might be doing in that same situation. To choose God cannot be a one-time choice. It cannot be something that we do and say and make a covenant and just expect it to be done and everything is good. It is something that we must actively do each and every day, each and every moment. We must choose to seek out God of the extraordinary. The God that is a miraculous God that leads us in pillars of fire and part seas. A God that can make manna appear from the ground and water from the rocks. We must seek to follow that God and not to allow the world to wear us down with the ordinary, but instead to actively go out beyond this worship space, beyond the routine of every week, and to find Him there in the people and the places out there. We are not called to serve simply to do good in the world. We are called to serve and to be out in the world because it is in the world where we experience and see Jesus, where we are a part of the miracles and where we are reminded of the God whom we serve, where those memories aren't allowed to fade because we continue to see them each and every day as we strive to go further and deeper in our faith. And I cannot lie to you, it's not an easy thing. It will be tough, especially at first. It means that we change who we are and how we do things, and that we have to actively work at it each and every day. Consciously choosing to make those decisions until we see the miracles and until we are fueled, and it becomes easier as we experience them more and more frequently as we grow closer and closer to the kingdom of heaven and to the heart of God. As your pastor, I get to be a leader among you like Joshua was among the Israelites. I get to stand before you and remind you of what God has done in your lives, what God is doing in your lives. And I get to speak to you about what God could be doing in your lives. And I ask you whether you are going to choose the way things have always been, whether you are going to sit and be comfortable with the numbers and the people who are here in these pews, or whether you are willing to seek out a God who will fill these pews, who will add to the numbers, who will bring the children. A God who wants to see this church and this people here and now do great things that transform the community of Towanda and make it a place where people want to come and live, because it is a place where they can experience the power of God in their midst. As for me and mine, I choose to serve the Lord. Who will you serve? Will you allow God to fade away into the memories of the past? Will you allow yourselves to be comfortable with what you can see and what is, or will you actively seek and strive for the future that God has called you to, a future of God's miraculous acts around you and through you? That is the question that we face today. Are you willing to settle for the ordinary, the everyday? Are you willing to be comfortable? Or are you willing to strive for greatness? Amen.